The hills surrounding the village of San Lero always seemed taller than they really were. Small hills of stone and dry earth, crowned by twisted trees that seemed to watch over the simple houses built in the valley. Time passed slowly there, as if the world had forgotten these people, and the routine was marked by the sunrise and sunset, the work in the fields, and the oppressive silence of the nights. But there was something that never let the residents forget their own fate, the well in the center of the square. From a distance, it was just an ancient stone structure, covered in moss and surrounded by rusty chains that served more as a warning than a physical barrier. A perfect circle, carved from irregular granite blocks that seemed as solid as it was eternal. But no one approached. The square was the heart of the village, but the well was its blind spot, an emptiness in the center of life. Not even the children, who, in other places, ran wild, had the courage to play there. It was as if the air around it was colder, heavier, charged with a melancholy that seemed to crush the soul. During the day, the well remained motionless, like any other. Its darkness was a secret it kept in silence. But when night fell and the moon appeared between the hills, something transformed. First, a whisper, almost imperceptible, like wind dragging dust. Slowly, the words took shape, and the whisper turned into voices. They came from inside the well, climbing the stone walls and spreading through the sleeping village, penetrating the cracks in doors and windows. The problem was that those voices were not human. Sometimes they sounded like children calling for their mothers, a cry of despair that made the mothers of San Lero press their children against their chests. Other times, like old people praying in agony, their prayers muffled and distorted. Sometimes the voices were even more sinister. They seemed to imitate the voice of someone from the village itself, a perfect imitation, but lifeless, like an echo of what had been. And there were nights when the well called specific names, an echo that passed through closed windows, penetrated dreams, and made the person wake up in a cold sweat. It was a rule of survival among the residents, a sacred dogma passed down from generation to generation. When your name was called, you should not, under any circumstances, answer. The well was dug long before San Lero existed. The elders said that, at the time, the village didn't even have a name, just a few families who lived off the land and cattle. As generations passed, the well became the center of life, a source of clean and abundant water. But one day, something changed. The first recorded story, which had been told for over 200 years, spoke of a girl, Mariella, who went down to the well with a rope to retrieve a dropped bucket. She never came back. The rope was pulled back, and it was cut, as if it had been gnawed by invisible teeth. Years later, it was a young hunter's turn, then an old shepherd. The families began to suspect that it wasn't just an accident. They said there was something at the bottom, not water, but a presence, a being that fed on souls, that hid in the dark depths, waiting for a call. Prayers were said, exorcisms were performed, and the bravest men in the village tried to fill the well with stones and earth. But with each attempt, the workers disappeared or went insane. The well, somehow, remained open, as if it refused to be sealed.
The well was the heart of the curse. It wasn't there to provide water, it was there to take lives. In the present day, the well was no longer used. Everyone preferred to walk miles to a distant stream than to risk a sip of its water. But the voices continued. Old Damiao, the only survivor of the previous generation, used to say that the voices changed with the moon. On full moons, they sounded almost human, crying or asking for help, a chorus of agony that seemed to seek redemption. On new moons, they were guttural, deep, as if something greater than man was moving down there.
No one liked to hear him tell the stories, but it was impossible to deny everyone had felt, at least once, the shiver of hearing their own name echoing from the dark bottom.
One summer, the quiet of San Lero was broken by the arrival of a stranger, a man named Raphael, a researcher of legends and ancient stories. He had heard rumors about the talking well, and naturally his curiosity didn't leave him in peace. The residents, used to seeing strangers pass through, only warned him, "If you hear it, don't answer. That's the only rule." But Raphael didn't believe in superstitions. He saw the legend as a cultural phenomenon, a reflection of collective fear. He settled into the small inn, and at night he would walk to the square, notebook in hand, writing down every detail.
On the first night, he heard nothing but the wind. On the second, a light whisper, which he interpreted as the sound of the breeze echoing off the stone walls. On the third, a child's voice, soft and tearful, called his name, Raphael. His heart froze. It was impossible. No one knew his name there except the innkeeper. The voice, however, was clear. The shock of seeing his logic collapse was stronger than the fear. He approached the edge and, defying reason, defying himself, defying the legend, he murmured, "Who's there?" Silence fell like a stone, heavy and absolute. Then the echo answered, repeating his voice, but distorted, as if something had swallowed it and spit it back out, a wet, guttural sound. "Who's there?" Raphael felt his stomach clench, terror invading every cell of his body. Still, instead of fleeing, he returned to his room and wrote everything down. The voice of the well was real.
The next night, Raphael took a flashlight and a thick rope with him. The residents who saw him cross the square said not a word. They closed their windows and locked themselves inside. They knew what would happen. They knew Raphael was going to his end. Upon reaching the edge of the well, he tied the rope to one of the stones and began to descend. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled of iron and decay, a mixture of the smell of blood and death. With every meter he descended, the whisper grew, now multiple, dozens of overlapping voices, some laughing, others crying, all calling his name. The sound was deafening. "Raphael, come, stay with us." When the flashlight illuminated the bottom, he realized there was not just water. There were bones, skulls, ribs, intertwined hands, all accumulated as if the well were a collective tomb, a cemetery for all who dared to answer. And, among the bones, something moved. A liquid shadow, which had no definite shape, but had eyes. Many eyes, scattered across the black body like glowing embers in the darkness.
It was the voice.
It was the entity. The voices of the dead united in a single scream, a chorus of agony and hunger. "Stay with us!" The rope stretched violently. Raphael tried to climb up, but something pulled his feet. The bone of a hand, or maybe it wasn't bone, grabbed his ankle. The creature's skin was cold and sticky, and he felt an electric shock. He screamed. The flashlight fell, plunging everything into darkness. Raphael's scream became a sound of bubbles, and then silence. The next morning, the innkeeper realized that Raphael hadn't returned. In the square, the rope was still tied to the edge of the well, cut like those of so many ancient stories. No one approached. They just whispered among themselves, another one that the well had called. At night, when the moon rose between the hills, the voices returned, but this time, along with the old ones, a new one joined the chorus. "Help! Someone get me out of here!" It was Raphael's voice. The residents closed their doors and windows. It was no use anymore. With each generation, the well chose someone, and it would continue to choose until no one was left in San Lero. Because the voice in the well didn't come from within, it came from below, from something that waited patiently, feeding on those who dared to answer. And as long as the village existed, the well would never be silent.
No one approached. They just whispered among themselves. Another one that the well had called. At night, when the moon rose between the hills, the voices returned. But this time, along with the old ones, a new one joined the chorus. "Help! Someone get me out of here!" It was Raphael's voice. The residents closed their doors and windows. It was no use anymore. With each generation, the well chose someone, and it would continue to choose until no one was left in San Lero. Because the voice in the well didn't come from within. It came from below, from something that waited patiently, feeding on those who dared to answer. And as long as the village existed, the well would never be silent.